Ok, bom dia para todos e todas. Estamos aqui para uma mesa, então, do nosso congresso, né? Our Passion for the Future. Estamos muito felizes, então, por estar no último dia, né? E, ao mesmo tempo, tristes, porque a coisa está terminando, então, né, temos muito... Já discutimos muita coisa, foram 2 dias muito, muito felizes, e hoje vamos, então, para esse último dia com mais coisas interessantes. Estamos aqui numa mesa, então, que tem como tema educação regenerativa, Regenerative Education. Temos 4 convidados aqui muito especiais, muito importantes para nós, amigos, né? São 2 professores da Austrália, Gilbert Burgh e Jennifer Bleazby, e um professor dos Estados Unidos, Maughn Gregory, e a professora Nathalie Frogneux, muitos de nós conhecemos, da Universidade Catholique de Louvain-la-Neuve. Então, nós estamos muito felizes. Thank you so much for your presence. We are very happy to be with you here, to have you here. And so we will start with Gilbert Burgh, da Universidade de Queensland. I will read your notes about your biography in Portuguese for the people who knows who we are, Gilbert. So, Gilbert é professor, deixa um minuto aqui, professor, então, honorário, associado honorário de filosofia na Escola de Histórica, de Pesquisa Histórica e Filosófica da Universidade de Queensland. Ele publicou uma série de trabalhos sobre filosofia educacional, especialmente sobre educação democrática, pedagogias, como é que eu diria, place responsive, ou seja, né, do lugar, respostas ao lugar, sobre o papel genuíno, por exemplo, das pesquisas em sala de aula, e é autor de vários livros, né, inclusive um que se chama Teaching Democracy in the Age of Uncertainty, né, uma coisa assim do tipo, ensinando democracia na idade das incertezas, né? Place Responsive Learning, que é de 2002, que ele escreveu com a Simone Thornton, que nós já conhecemos. So, Gilbert Burgh, thank you so much for your presence, and the floor is yours. Please, if you want to project your slides, it's okay. Thank you so much. Okay, we see.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Thank you, Gilbert. Again.
Voice is on. Yeah, place responsive pedagogies and how it links to Indigenous notions of place. You've had the PowerPoint there. On the bottom is the way we currently see the territories, which has actually been superimposed through colonisation over the map above, which is 250 language groups, tribes in Australia. So you can see here that the priority is placed on the nation state of Australia, but not all the sovereign states and language groups of the Indigenous traditional owners who've been here for 60,000 years. And I think this is an important thing to recognise when we look at place responsive education and how that links to climate change. So I'd like to make a couple of acknowledgements. The first one is I want to acknowledge the Jagera, Yugara and Ugara peoples, the original custodians in this paper, which is here. I also want to acknowledge that my presentation here is not just my own. It draws on the ongoing collaborative partnership I have with Simone Thornton, who is at the conference at present, and Kumba Mary, Waka Waka woman and philosopher Mary Graham. So, I want to just give a bit of a background here. When we're talking about thinking ecologically, I have to acknowledge that there's been an increase by non-Indigenous scholars to include Indigenous knowledge systems in their research and in their curriculum. And as well, there's been a significant increase in the adoption of alternative energy sources, such as using EVs and solar panels and the such. So whilst this is good news that we've acknowledged these things, and in particular, the particular techno fixes necessary to move away from fossil fuels, my argument really is that it's not enough in terms of developing ecological identities, because the development of an ecological identity is what makes us change the way we think about education, rather than education and environment, rather than simply applying utilitarian calculations to how we live our life. And with that, I'm looking at the reason I'm looking at place-responsive pedagogies as a way of developing such eco-identities. Now, another bit of background here, and I think it's really important, is that what we have currently is that it shows, all the studies seem to show that there's been a rapid increase or a huge increase in anxiety. So Gen Z, for example, has had a 139% increase as compared to previous generations. And when we look at the current Gen Alpha generation, 1 in 5 children have been diagnosed with some kind of mental, emotional, or behavioural condition in which anxiety being the most prevalent. So anxiety is becoming an issue in our society, and it's causing somewhat of a problem. Now, one of the things I think is really important when I've been looking at some of these studies is what a lot of people have been calling certainty machines. And what is meant by certainty machines is that the Gen Alpha and previous generations have been raised in a world where uncertainty is kind of engineered out of their daily life. In other words, they seek certainty. So uncertainty generates anxiety. And examples of that are GPS, digital family calendars, weather apps, smart speakers, and youth sports apps. It can guarantee you instant information to get from one place to another, or whether something's been rescheduled. However, one of the problems with that is that uncertainty builds resilience. And if you engineer uncertainty out of people, then we don't have uncertainty in order to be able to tap into that kind of inquiry-based learning. In other words, uncertainty helps us to deal with the real world out there, and helps us to seek that knowledge ourselves, learn how to live in place rather than relying on things giving us information. So in order for this to happen, to move away from that, and I'm not saying that technology is evil or we shouldn't have it, but what I'm saying is it's moving us away from being present in place, and it's causing distractions from being present. And often these distractions, which is, linked a lot to the current tech that we have with computers and so forth, it's touted as useful tools or things that will help us enjoy other things. However, what is not always mentioned is that it's actually driven by a culture of increasing productivity that drives government policies to compete international and corporate profit agendas. So in a sense, and we see it in our government in Australia and all around the world, but certainly in Australia, that we have productivity commissions. So everything in education and industry is about developing productivity, which means the quicker we gain knowledge, or we can use IT, AI, and whatever to give us that knowledge, it increases productivity. But it's also supposed to give us time to do other things. But the evidence shows that it doesn't give us time to do other things, because people that in work, their work hours is consumed by this productivity, which of course causes problems outside of the working environment. But this has spurred a demand for job-ready kind of degrees, which in a sense has created a whole host of problems, in particular for the social sciences and the humanities, to the point of there being massive job cuts and the elimination of entire majors. And we see this in Australia, and I'm reading about it all around the world. The downside of all this is that the emphasis on inquiry pedagogy, experiential learning, and learning by doing is considered slow and unproductive. So in other words, it's anti-productivity. And this is something we as academics and educators should be really thinking about. In addition, this has spurred research into ICT, AI, robotics, and other such things, which creates further radical inequalities because of the loss of jobs, even though it's argued that it's going to create further jobs. And this creates that problem that radical inequality creates disadvantage for poorer communities who don't have the resources to deal with climate change. Now, I want to just bring in two very important things. They may not seem linked, but they are. But over on the left here, we have the regent honeyeater, which is losing its ability to learn its species-specific mating call due to a loss of habitat, from development and so forth. So therefore, the males are unable to develop this call. That prevents mating, and it's decreasing rapidly, and the species, and it's becoming critically endangered now. And that's due to not being place responsive. We just think, there's still bush there for them to, but they don't take into account the navigational path of the bird and so forth. The other one is the APD, which is about the blocking out of sounds or using technologies like your iPods and whatever you use and your earphones, that the brain forgets to filter out noise. So what we see is a lot of children who have at one time thought to be getting deaf or loss of hearing are not really losing hearing. What it is their brains are not able to sort out the noise from the blooming, buzzing confusion out there. And that creates an anxiety. So they can't filter it out because they're not place-oriented. They're living in their headphones and on their computers. This is a real issue, at least as far as I'm concerned. So that links to this. It's that there's two types of knowledge, which some of us would know about this. There's knowing that, which is propositional knowledge. You teach someone that is the case, so you have scientific knowledge. And there's knowing how, which is practical knowledge. Just a quick example is all the knowledge about balance scientifically and the mechanics of a bike will not help me to hop on the bike and ride and turn a corner. What I need is to fall off the bike and have near accidents and everything like that in order to know how to balance. So how to balance and knowing what balance is are two different things. Place-responsive education focuses on knowing how as an important aspect of developing identity. You can only develop an identity as a bike rider if you ride a bike, not necessarily know scientifically about balance. The other important thing is the acquisition of knowledge. There's instant knowledge, so acquiring information through understanding rapidly, so you get immediate facts and insights and so forth. The other one is pragmatic inquiry, which is that careful, deliberative, and thoughtful reflection over extended periods of time. As many of us know here, that's very, very important for learning, because the notion of experiential learning, wondering about things, helps us to understand our environment and develop our identity as those living in a habitat and how our habits affect it. So we experience it rather than knowing about it. Now, the other thing to note here when we talk about place-responsive education is what is place? So firstly, place is not simply space in which we live. It is not neutral ground upon which activities occur. It's not a passive backdrop, nor it is a static location. But it is a dynamic environment which influenced by the activities that occur within it. In other words, it is epistemically imbued with meaning and significance. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. I want to use a metaphor of, and as a kind of illustration of what I mean by using this little map here. Now, you see that road, it's about 1,200 kilometres from Brisbane down to Sydney. And since I was 17, I travelled that, without an exaggeration, over 1,000 times. And I've gone up there and up the other yellow road and across the path, heaps and heaps of times. So just to give you a quick history on that, at the age of 17, I got into my car. We never had any maps. Occasionally you'd have a little mud map or something. But basically you learnt this. You go into Brisbane is I'm heading north. That means we're on the east coast. So the ocean's on the right-hand side. The sun is in the east on the right-hand side in the morning. It's on the west on the right-hand side in the afternoon. And that's where the hinterland is. So basically, you just headed up to Brisbane with that and the notion that you're on highway number 1. And you followed your way. If you got lost as you stopped off at places, the answer was quite simple. You just find your way back. And as you found your way back, you learned more about the place. If you really got lost, you could always tell, well, if I'm heading in the wrong direction, well, the sun shouldn't be here, it should be there, so I'll turn around. So there was a way in which you embedded yourself in direction, in place, navigation, and so forth. But also, as you hugged the coast, you would stop off. You would discover where the best pie shop is, where the best surfing beach is, where this is, where that is. And you would do it by discovering it, walking in the shopping centres, driving here, driving there, talking to locals. And that's how you discovered things. Over the years, the road straightened out more. So less and less you were hugging the road, and now we have this massive highway. What that means is to get off the road, you might need to go half an hour or 15 minutes to hug the coast. So what's happening now is people are driving with their GPSs going straight up the road. They're stopping off at franchise chains that are connected to BP garages like McDonald's and Hungry Jack's and so forth, and they're missing all those local things. So what's happening is we're losing a sense of place. We're losing the localities. We're not understanding who the Indigenous groups that live along the coast are and along the hinterland. To me, that acts as a metaphor for the kind of distractions we're having now. The GPS will tell you how to save 4 minutes to get from Brisbane to Sydney, but it's a 12-hour trip. 4 minutes is not going to change anything. Similarly, going off the highway for half an hour to get a hamburger or something along the coast to talk to the locals and support the local economy makes a huge difference to how we become place responsive and have an obligation to place. So what I'm getting at with that example is that navigational technology can be distracting and negatively impact spatial awareness and the ability to be present in, mindful of physical location, example, or that is being place conscious and place responsive. This distraction can lead to a diminished sense of direction. And it also conditions us to stop wondering, and what it's doing is engineering us against uncertainty, which then is a problem for that kind of problem-based learning that we're speaking of. Here's an example of some of the distractions. We all can be at one point accused of this or seeing our friends do it. You know, we go to dinner, we meet somebody, and then everyone's on the phone getting distracted by something else that's happening miles elsewhere. So now let's connect that to Aboriginal connectedness to place. Here, place is an orienting phenomena in the face of change. It serves a fundamental existential constant. So place is an existential constant. It is a measuring device that informs us not only where we are at any time, but more importantly, who we are. And that is, place and being are inextricably linked. And I think that's a very important part. Without that, we lose our identity with place and being. So the ontology of place and the ontology of self. If we lose this with that, what we have is a separation of the environment and the human. In other words, that we are what is often referred to as the condition of human life, or our home, as Dewey would call it. We lose that connection with our physical environment, and thus the continuity between human nature, the organic, and the natural environment. Now, such a disconnection can prevent the development of a relational self or a place-responsive identity. Now, place-based learning is not just outdoor education, like, playing sport or playing football. It could also include being in the classroom. So wherever you are, it's paying attention to place. Where is the classroom situated? What kind of place is it? And it focuses not just on the classroom, but where it connects to our suburb, our town, our city, the communities, and so forth. So we're connecting learning to what Dewey called, John Dewey called the greater community. The greater community where we come from, where we bring all our biases, baggages, and whatever into the classroom. Place-based education in that sense collapses that theory-practice dualism. Now, just give you one example here is if you think of kids playing football in a football field, place there is not neutral. The football field is imbued with the rules of football. So it's all about epistemically football. The football field is not just a field, it has rules. You get penalised if you don't follow the rules, you get sent off, and so forth. But you go one layer further, that epistemic sports field now takes over what was once imbued with the natural environment, the nature that got stripped away to build that. And then when you look at that even further, you look at the colonisation of the country that allowed this to happen, that's taken away these sort of epistemic indigenous landscapes. So there's layering of landscapes and what they mean. When we look at Aboriginal ways of doing, Australian Aboriginals, we see that developing a sense of direction and awareness in place is very important. Watch first, then do. So it's all about being aware of what's around you before you do. Learning and communicating without words is also important. So it's that non-verbal cues. And yarning circles. We're used to that with philosophy for children. You get into circles, you tell yarns, stories, yarns meaning, narratives you tell each other. You draw in the sand, so everything is done as in terms of the place where you are actually being present in. So the last thing I wanted to say with that is how does all this affect what we do now? Mount Rushmore, I think, is a classic example of how to look at not being place responsive, I guess. So if we're looking at place responsivity in terms of the Mount Rushmore Monument, what we see here is the imposition of a colonial rule over centuries of Indigenous sovereignty in that particular area. But it's a different type of sovereignty, obviously not the sovereignty that we're used to when we talk about liberal sovereignty. But we're talking about land and country being a sense of place for certain groups. And in this case, the Great Sioux Nation, which treated Paha Sapa or the Black Hills as sacred, or what Mary Graham talks about with Aboriginal philosophy is sacralizing land, meaning that land, if you strip away the land, you strip away our identity. So if you look at that, it's stripping away Indigenous identity and imposing these people who supposedly made America great. So what we have is the greatness of America is depicted there. Now, I granted that the history of the Indigenous groups, like the Lakota Sioux tribe, appears there. However, it still takes a secondary place over the current sovereignty of the Indigenous, of the United States of America. So the problem here is, once we've colonized, how do we decolonize? And this is where I think place-responsive pedagogies can help us, because the one thing I've learned when engaging with Indigenous people and teaching students over the last 30 years is if you teach them all about knowing that, it becomes what you might call academic or technical knowledge. And it's one thing to know about indigenous knowledges, it's another thing, and it's also, and to know who was here before and so forth. However, being in place helps us to understand that better. And what do we mean by in place? Well, practice those things. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we look at our liberal identities, it's not like we're just taught about them in schools. It's part of our culture. It's part of our policies. In other words, when we're born into liberal identities, whether we like it or not, even if we reject them, we're born into these liberal identities. So to just learn about Indigenous identities cannot compete with that. So the idea is when we become place responsive, it's to open up dialogue between Indigenous ways of knowing and being and doing and our ways of knowing and being and doing, but not to act in conflict with each other, but try to understand whether these concepts can help us. Why were they so successful with the Indigenous peoples? What can we adopt? What have we done wrong when we strip some of those away? How did we get how we are? So what we're looking at is the epistemic landscape and how we can embed ourselves in that and using that as a way to make changes in terms of identity. And the last thing I want to say about that is it's important to know that what place-based education talks about is local. So the idea being is if you can understand your local place, then you extend that to how that might fit globally, whilst each locality or place has a different sense of how things developed here, as opposed to, say, in New York or Rio or wherever we are, that we do have some things in common, and particularly with climate change, because the way we act affects us now globally. So to act locally is the most important part. How do we bring all that local knowledge in? And that brings me back to that map. The one thing we can do, for example, is if we decide to drive from Sydney to here or wherever you are, 1,200 miles somewhere, is to stop taking the highway and start stopping off at the local shops instead of buying a McDonald's. So you get to know and understand those places. Instead of using your Google Maps to, for example, say, where is the best place to buy something to eat here, you just walk into the shop. The worst thing we can do is make a mistake. And as the story goes, the journey is more important than the end. And when it comes to philosophy of children, we all argue that the best way to learn is to make mistakes. We learn through our mistakes, our disagreements. And I think the same applies for our everyday life. And if we don't, as educators, live that in our everyday life, how can we teach it to our children? So I think I made the time limit by about 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert. Perfect. Thank you so much for your so astonished presentation. And we have a lot to speak about and to discuss after the other presentation. Thanks so much. So for now, we will give the floor to Jennifer Bleazby. Thank you so much, Jennifer, to be here with us. We are very, very happy to hear you. So, Jennifer ela é professora da Escola de Educação, Cultura e Sociedade da Monash University, Melbourne. Suas pesquisas, seus interesses e pesquisas incluem filosofia da educação, filosofia pragmatista, especialmente a filosofia de John Dewey, currículo, teoria do currículo, educação moral e religiosa, filosofia nas escolas e também educação para a autonomia, para o bem-estar e para a felicidade, happiness. So, Jennifer, thank you again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, my paper is going to build on Gil's nicely, but we didn't collaborate at all. There's some overlap in the themes.
Thank you.
So my paper is about moral and environmental education as a response to declining happiness and well-being amongst children and young people. So it's based on a forthcoming book chapter, which the title's down the bottom. I don't know when that book chapter is going to come out. And I'd like to acknowledge Monash University. Monash University's campuses are located on the unceded lands of the people of the Kulin Nations, and we pay our respects to their elders past and present. And I am currently on the lands of the Gunakurnai people in Gippsland in Victoria. Okay, so I'll just give an overview of my presentation. So I'm going to look at moral education, and I think with moral education there tends to be a lot of focus on, teaching about right behavior and being a good person and how we ought to behave, character education. But of course, moral education was also about teaching the skills, behaviors, and knowledge that we need to live purposeful and meaningful lives and to contribute to the world. As such, I think moral education might help address what people think looks like declines of happiness and well-being amongst young people and children in some affluent Western nations, which Gil just referred to this as well. And in particular, I'm going to look at some of the negative impacts of digital technology on the well-being of children and young people. And I'm going to extend on my previous work on ethics education that uses Dewey's theory of communal inquiry to outline a type of moral education and environmental education that might help address this issue. And yep, so this type of moral education is particularly beneficial when it's used with like nature-based learning, environmental education, place-based learning, like Gil just explained. Okay. So I'm just going to start off with an overview of the problem. So this is some research about declining happiness and well-being amongst young people. Okay, so the 2024 World Happiness Report found that in the sort of affluent Western nations like the US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the UK too, I think, levels of happiness have fallen over the past 15 years, but especially for the youngest group of people aged under 30. And data from this period, so they average it over a 3-year period, revealed that those aged under 30 were now the least happy of all age groups, which is not what it used to look like. So in happiness research, there was always this assumption, I'm just going to move this over here, that there was sort of a U-shape with happiness, so that children and young people were very happy, and then happiness declined. These are not real graphs, by the way, they're AI-generated images, just to explain the point. That we start off very happy, and then in midlife we're miserable. That's apparently where I am now. And then it's supposed to get, as we get old, we get happy again. But research is getting data now that's saying it's starting to look like this. Like children and young people are actually quite unhappy. So it's a J shape now, no longer a U shape, until about age 50. And then we start to get happier. People get happier as they get older because they just stop caring so much and worrying about things, basically. So, and some other research, this global flourishing study, which just came out, which is very interesting too, if people want to have a look at that, measures flourishing around the world using a whole range of indicators, including like meaning, more than just life satisfaction, but having meaning and purpose in one's life. They find the same thing. Cumulative evidence here and elsewhere likely reflects some real changes in well-being's relation with age that have been taking place over time. Young people are not doing as well as they used to be. Okay. So, and other data that supports this is growing concerns about increasing mental illness and distress amongst children and young people in these same nations. So reported rates of mental illness have been increasing amongst young people from 2009 to 2019. This is in the US. The proportion of high school students reporting persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness increased by 44%. And the share creating suicide plans increased by 44%. And the US Surgeon General, he's no longer the US Surgeon General, stated that the US was in the grips of a youth mental health crisis, which was a defining public health crisis of our time. That was in 2023. Similar issues in Australia and the UK and some other nations as well. So in Australia, since 2007, there's been a 50% increase in the numbers of young people aged 16 to 24 suffering clinically significant mental health disorders. Now, some people say that this is just an increase in reporting because people are more aware of mental health issues today. However, most experts think that doesn't explain this data, because that doesn't explain the increases in severe mental illnesses like clinical ones and increases in hospitalizations and so on. Being more aware of mental health issues probably wouldn't cause those things to increase. It might cause the increase in people saying they feel depressed or so on, but not severe mental health issues. So there's a complex range of causes of issues that experts think are contributing to this. The cost of living crisis and climate change anxiety is another one. Anxiety is one of the illnesses, as Gil mentioned, that's increasing quite a lot, in particular, amongst young people. But research has also identified digital technologies, especially social media use, as one particularly potent factor. Okay. For example, US social psychologist Jean Twenge has argued that happiness and life satisfaction among US adolescents increased between 1991 and 2011, and then suddenly declined after 2012, which is around the time when most Americans came to own smartphones. So she thinks this is a key contributing factor to these issues. Okay, so some of the reasons technology might be contributing to this decrease in happiness and well-being. Spending excessive amounts of time online displaces other activities that researchers have long thought are associated with increased well-being and happiness. So, for example, exercise, time outdoors and in nature, and in-person social and community activities, social connections and relationships, and other orientated activities like being altruistic are some of the biggest indicators researchers have repeatedly found that are associated with higher rates of well-being and happiness. In countries like Australia, we know that children and young people are spending excessive amounts of time in front of screens, not outdoors and exercising and engaged in social activities. So for children aged 5 to 12 in Australia, they spend about on average 31.5 hours a week engaged in screen-based activities. This is of their leisure time, so this excludes school time. So outside of school, and teenagers about 43.6 hours, so the equivalent of a full-time job in front of screens outside of school hours. And Richard Love coined this term nature deficit syndrome, which prompted a whole movement called No Child Left Inside because of concern. And that was before everybody had smartphones. That was in 2008, so it must be even worse, possibly even much worse now, because he was so concerned about the lack of time children spend outside. So the other reason digital technology might contribute to decreasing happiness and well-being is that a lot of social media influences and social media in general promote really idolized, glamorized, materialistic lifestyles and values. For example, if anybody watches any of these sorts, if anybody has children and they let their children on YouTube, you will find a lot of them, they end up, whatever they start off watching, half the time they end up watching people like this kid. This is Ryan Kaji from Ryan's World. He was the highest earning YouTuber of 2019. He had 24 million subscribers. Most of his whole YouTube channel was him unboxing toys, going on shopping sprees and unboxing stuff and playing with all these different toys and trying them out. But this is a common theme on a lot of the big social media influencers, shopping and consuming and unboxing stuff. Frequent exposure to any media that's really materialistic has been shown to encourage materialistic values amongst young people. And this researcher, Casa, refers to them as junk values, like materialistic values, including valuing material wealth and possessions, valuing physical attractiveness, social status, and fame. So why are these sort of values associated with unhappiness? So, of course, philosophers have argued this for a very long time, even before they were doing empirical research about this. Hedonic values and lifestyles can't lead to genuine happiness because they're not satisfying. So you get some sort of materialistic, momentary happiness or pleasure, but then it just goes away and then you need to just have more of this. It doesn't fulfill you. And Casa, who's a contemporary social psychologist, uses this really good analogy. He calls them junk values because they're like junk food. They don't satisfy us for very long. They're not satiating. It's like junk food. You eat a little bit and then you just want more pretty soon afterwards. And they're addictive. Some empirical research supports this as well. So Casa refers to a whole bunch of different studies in this literature review in 2016 about research from psychologists about junk values, materialistic values. He says people who prioritize junk values have been shown they're more likely to incur more debt, have lower quality interpersonal relationships, act in more ecologically destructive ways, so they do not have pro-environmental values, have adverse work and educational motivation, and report lower personal and physical well-being. These values also conflict with values that are associated with greater happiness and well-being, like social connections and being altruistic and spending time in nature. Okay. So how could a Druian approach to moral and environmental education help address this sort of issue? So I've argued previously in a paper in 2020 using Dewey's general theory of inquiry as the basis for a theory of moral education. So just his general theory of inquiry, I'll just look at this quickly because I've got an example on the next slide, has these general stages to it. So, and moral inquiry would be just go through this inquiry process, but we'd be focused on moral problems. And I'll give an example in a minute. So we have a problematic situation. So we come into conflict with our environment in some way. We don't know how to act in a meaningful, intelligent way. And that triggers the inquiry process. So we start thinking about what we have to do. We reflect on our problematic experience. We try to articulate the problem. As Dewey says, a problem well put is a problem half solved. So we first have to articulate what is the problem, what is wrong, what is causing the confusion. Then we start to formulate a problem solution. Preferably we generate multiple solutions or hypotheses, because that forces us to critically compare them. And when we critically compare them, we're more likely to scrutinize them and come up with a better solution. So that's it. We evaluate the tentative solutions. Then we test out our solution in a controlled situation or some sort of controlled experiment first. Then we make a judgment and apply that problem. We take action, we apply it to the world and see if it resolves the problem. But we also reflect on the whole process. And if our problem works, we have generated new knowledge or beliefs and perhaps new habits as well. So especially if we act on the knowledge that we gain from this repeatedly, we can internalize it. And from that, we can acquire new values and habits. But this knowledge, these values, these habits are fallible. So they can always be reconstructed in future experience. They're not certain absolute beliefs. However, Dewey also said that communal inquiry, communal inquiry is superior to individual inquiries. So it's always best that we do go through this process in a communal setting. And that's because most of our problems are social problems anyway, and we live in the world with other people. So we should be collaborating and working with other people to work through problems as much as possible. So what would this look like if we applied it in schools as a type of moral and environmental education? So this is just a fictional example, but it is based on some real case studies of sorts of programs kids have done in schools. So during a science research project, a group of students are supposed to research different types of fabrics and materials to see which are most sustainable. And they discovered that synthetic fabrics like polyester can take 20 to 200 years to decompose compared to 6 months or less for cotton. And the students realized that all of their clothes that they're wearing are synthetic fabrics. And worse yet, they realized that they often buy clothes, wear them a few times and get rid of them because they want to keep up with the latest fashions. They realized their behavior is common amongst their peers as well, and it's contributing to a significant hazard, leaving them feeling anxious and guilty. So this triggers the inquiry process. They have a problem. They're in conflict with their environment. So they formulate an inquiry question. How can they educate the community about the impact of fast fashion? So it's not a personal issue. They know it's a bigger social issue. So they formulate and evaluate some solutions. They come up with various possible ways they could address this. They realize that some of them are a bit boring and probably wouldn't be effective, like just making a presentation at the school assembly. So instead, they decide to hold a fashion swap event at the school where people bring their old clothes and they can swap them with other people, and they do a fashion show displaying the different clothes that they've got. I've seen a school actually do something like this. They have to prepare a plan, pitch it to the school, rehearse aspects of it. So they test out their idea, then they enact the solution. The event goes very successfully. The media comes and covers it, the local news and so on. Okay. As a result of this whole process, the students also develop a bunch of new beliefs, values, and habits. So they not only learn about the importance of sustainable consumption and about community engagement and social action, if they internalize any of these beliefs and behaviors, they can develop moral values and habits that can shape their future decision-making and action. Didn't keep a timer, so I don't know if I go over, Jelson. Just tell me to stop.
Okay, no.
Okay, so how could this improve happiness and well-being? I'm good. I'm good. Okay. Moral values and habits act as a moral compass for us. So as Casa explains, our values underpin our life goals and the daily decisions about how we spend our time and money. So if we have good values, this infiltrates our whole life, all the decisions we make. And Dewey also argued that a commitment to a clear set of moral values unifies the parts of the self and our life into a meaningful whole. It gives us a cohesive sense of self, purpose, meaning, which contributes to leading a happy life. But again, that doesn't mean that the values are permanent or fixed. They're not like bad habits we can't transform. There are always things that they can be problematized and we can reflect upon them and change them if we need to. And moral inquiries can help us identify the pitfalls of junk values if we have them, and for ourselves and the world, and replace them with other orientated values and things like pro-environmental values, which are associated with greater happiness and well-being. So in the example, the girls replaced their junk values of wanting to keep up with the fashions and discarding these clothes really quickly with pro-social and environmental values after going through this inquiry process. And when also developing the capacity for inquiry can also foster resilience, which can help with well-being and happiness. So when experienced inquirers encounter problematic situations, and Gil referred to this too, this uncertainty and conflict, they know how to deal with it. So they've got skills and capacities. They know that these inquiry skills, that's exactly what they're for. They're for tackling problems. They're for trying to overcome conflicts with your environment. It can give you a sense of confidence. And instead of being overcome with fear and anxiety, you can draw on these skills that you've developed and just, you know that this is a normal part of life to have these challenges and problems. And you've got this bunch of tools there that you can draw on to try and tackle the situation. And it's also how you construct knowledge and meaning. So you know that problems can lead to good things, growth, new knowledge. People who lack those skills, they're more likely to be overcome with panic and anxiety when they encounter uncertainty and conflicts, because they just they don't realize that this is a source of growth and they don't have the skills to deal with it. Reducing the negative impacts of uncertainty can also discourage junk values, because as Cass says, when people feel more insecure and threatened, they're more inclined to have materialistic values in the first place. Yeah. So yes, having these moral values and so on can also give you a sense of calm and that cohesive sense of self that helps you to interact with the world in a more calm, efficient manner. And by directing students' attention to social and environmental problems, it may give them the confidence to seek out and participate in social activity themselves. So once they've done this once at school, they might develop habits and an attitude and a disposition towards doing this. So they might be more inclined to engage in social activities, community work, join community groups, and nature-based activities, all of which, again, are associated with increased happiness and well-being. It also gets them out. If they're doing that, it displaces time that might have been spent in front of screens, and that decreases the time they're exposed to materialistic values, which is one of the ways people like Casa say we can reduce the impact, reduce the likelihood of young people having materialistic values. We just reduce how often they're exposed to those values. And just very quickly, the last thing, this is a real example of an ethics program that's based on philosophy for children that runs in New South Wales schools. It's called primary ethics because it started in primary schools or elementary schools, but it's also run in secondary schools now. It's delivered about 500 schools to 55,000 students, and based on philosophy for children movement. The original program was written by philosopher Phil Cam, who's a leader in the P4C movement. And just some of the curriculum topics they look at deal with some of these issues too. They address things like materialistic values and so on. Like this is a kindergarten topic, the ethics of making things up and showing off. Primary school, being greedy. What does it mean to be greedy? Is there something wrong with wanting more money or toys than you can use? Or wanting to be the richest person in the world, to have more than anyone else? And also in secondary school, they look at happiness. But I would say this curriculum could be improved if it was also connected to place-based learning and nature-based learning and more outdoors sort of stuff as well. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for your for presentation and to give us these ideas about some how can I say, current issues. Now in Brazil, we are very, very involved with this discussion. So Thank you so much. It's very nice to have some ideas about this complex problem. Thank you so much again. So let's go on. And we are now with Maughn Gregory. Hi, Maughn. We are very happy to have you here again as well. So, Maughn Gregory é professor da Fundação Educacional no Montclair State University, onde ele é diretor do Instituto para Desenvolvimento de Filosofia para Crianças. E ele também serve como grievance officer, uma coisa do tipo ouvidor, pelo que eu entendi, do sindicato local. Ele também é coordenador de pesquisa do Conselho Internacional de Investigações Filosóficas com crianças, né? E ele é coeditor da Routledge International Handbook para Filosofia para Crianças, que foi lançado em 2017. E também do Routledge, das séries, né, da coleção da Routledge para Filosofia para Crianças, os fundadores, né, dos fundadores para Filosofia para Crianças. Então, uma pessoa, como a gente está vendo aqui, muito capacitada. Thank you, Maughn, again, and the floor is yours. You have your time to present your ideas. Thank you so much again.
Thanks, Jelson. All right, I'll share my... Okay. All right. So thanks. I'm at Montclair State University, as Jelson said, but my home is actually in the North American West Desert, which is a very important place to me. And we are fast losing the last bit of wilderness that we have. And so some of my images are coming from there. All right, let's see. Having trouble forwarding. Let me try something else. Sorry. Okay. And Montclair State University is built upon the traditional and expropriated territory of the Lenape people, which the name means original people, and they're also known as the Delaware Nation. I want to start. Can you see these slides? Yeah? Okay, thanks.
Yes, we have.
I want to start by sharing a part of a poem by the American poet Frank Bidart, because I love it when poetry goes philosophical and I love it when philosophy goes poetical. So I'll just read this a little bit that I've excerpted here. He wrote, "There's something missing in our definition, vision of a human being, the need to make. Because existence is willy-nilly thrust into our hands, our fate is to make something, if nothing else, the shape cut by the arc of our lives. Making is the mirror in which we see ourselves. But being is making, not only large things, a family, a book, a business, but the shape we give this afternoon, a conversation between two friends, a meal, or misshape." So this morning, I would like to offer you a pragmatist account of the role of wonder in philosophical inquiry. Inquiry of every kind emerges from our lived experience, as Jennifer was talking about, and its purpose is to steer our experience toward well-being. Experience, when we talk about experience, we're talking about the career of an intelligent being that's acting in the world and being acted upon. And the being is trying not just to survive, but to thrive, to experience joy. And this is something that plants and insects do. It's something that animals of all kinds do. It's something that human beings do. And who knows, it's something probably that mountains and rivers do as well. And again, these are some of the living beings in my part of the world where I come from that make my life worth living. But the world is radically contingent. The world is pervaded by chance and by change, And so what this means is that the nature of beings change, like human nature changes, our environment changes. The universe is continually throwing up new obstacles to what we cherish, and also new pathways to different things that we might cherish. And so there's no manual that defines what our values mean. In other words, many of us have certain values like justice, or we want to be good parents or a good teacher, but there's no dictionary that tells us what that means in a new experience. What does justice mean in a novel experience, in a new situation? So we have to figure that out. So we have habits of belief and action. We have relationships. We have institutions. We have spiritual and digital technologies. We have cultural traditions. But these things are wobbly. They're unstable. They're always in peril of falling apart or of taking new shape. And so inquiry is how we figure out and reconstruct them. And we reconstruct these things in order to either preserve something that we still value or to make way for some new kind of value that we've just discovered. So pragmatism, most fundamentally for me, is an attitude and an approach to making our way in a universe that is pervaded both by tragedy and hope. And tragedy and hope is always relative to our purposes, and our purposes are always shifting. That's the situation in which wonder happens. So this account of wonder includes negative kinds of wonder, like fear and disgust and confusion, as well as positive kinds like faith and imagination and hope, intuition, and relatively neutral kinds that are temporarily neutral, like curiosity and surprise. Oops, let me go back. So the way I'm seeing it is that we are susceptible to wonder because, first of all, there are things we care about, but also because experience is precarious. So it's difficult to realize the things that we care about. And we're constantly learning about new kinds of things that we might care about. And that's why we experience wonder. So I've been really thinking about this. I've been taking kind of a deep dive into the philosophy of this late American philosopher, Justice Buckler, and his theory of judgment, which happened to be quite influential in the philosophy for children history, the history of philosophy for children. And Buckler wrote that there are three modes, he called them modes of human judgment. And he called them assertive, exhibitive, and active. Assertive judgment is dealing with propositional kinds of meaning. Exhibitive judgment is dealing with aesthetic kinds of meaning, and active judgment is dealing with ethical kinds of meaning. And he talked about validity norms that sort of govern each of these. So propositional, the norm is what's true or probably true. And in exhibitive, it's what is satisfying or beautiful in some way. And in the active meaning is governed by what's good or right or correct. I'm going to talk just briefly about each of these. So first of all, assertive judgments. We make judgments in the assertive mode when we interpret something in our world as having propositional meaning that can be adjudicated as true or false or probable. And it's important to recognize that not just words have propositional meaning. Things that we make can have propositional meaning, like a painting or a mandala. And things we do can have propositional meaning, like guerrilla theater. When a doctor reads a rash on your skin, that rash is having propositional meaning that the doctor's able to read. And when a bee does a dance, that other bees can translate as a flight pattern to where the good nectar is, that's propositional meaning. So we understand words and made things and events to have propositional meaning, and we say and make and do things with propositional meaning because we need things to make sense. We want our beliefs to be supported by good evidence and good arguments. We want them to be more or less consistent with each other. We want to not be lied to. We want to not be manipulated or mystified. Of course, we don't need everything in our experience to make rational sense in this way, but to a large extent and for certain purposes, we really do. And like my country right now is going through a crisis of public health and vaccination misinformation. And for me, that's one area in which we really do need things to make sense and think in terms of propositional meaning. Okay, we make judgments in the exhibitive mode when we interpret something as a structure or a fabrication that has parts in dynamic relation that can be judged as beautiful or satisfying in some way, or not beautiful and not satisfying. So words can have exhibitive meaning rather than propositional meaning. For example, in poetry and storytelling. Things that we make can have, obviously can have exhibitive meaning. Music and the visual arts and architecture are kinds of exhibitive judgments. And things that we do with our bodies, all kinds of things we do with our bodies can have exhibitive meaning, like dancing, cooking, gardening, and performing tea ceremony. So when we interpret and we make exhibitive judgments, we want things that we create to be satisfying in terms of their utility for certain situations. We want a chair that we make to be sturdy and comfortable and stylish, and all that, of course, is relative to a particular situation. When we make a smartphone app, when we build a sweat lodge, when we create a horror movie, what counts as satisfying is very context dependent. It's particular to the context. And then finally, active judgments. We make judgments in the active mode when we interpret something in the world as being the cause of some effect or the effect of some cause, such that the cause can be adjudicated as efficacious or not, and the effect can be adjudicated as moral or immoral, and that's broadly construed. So words can have active meaning, as when you give a command or a coach gives some direction to players, or you make a political speech or give a religious sermon or write a love song or give a good apology. These are words that actually move things in the world, make things in the world move in a cause-effect kind of way. Things we make can have active meaning, such as tools. If we interpret and we make active judgments, we want our actions to both work well, to be efficacious, to be effective as causes, but also to have a right or a correct or a moral or an appropriate effect in ways that a particular situation calls for. And diverse, different kinds of contexts have different norms that govern what counts as appropriate, such as in a court of law, or in a religious community, or in a hospital, or a battlefield, or a classroom. What counts as correct behavior? There are different kinds of norms for that. So across all three of these modes of judgment, again, negative wonder takes the form of confusion or suspicion about our beliefs, or of displeasure or boredom with something made or some kind of performance, or frustration or indignation about a clumsy or inappropriate act. And positive wonder manifests as intimations that we feel in our bodies and our imaginations that things might make more sense or be better designed or better performed, better executed. Now, when we talk about philosophical inquiry, we are talking about, at least in the Western tradition, we're talking about questions of, for example, justice and injustice, beauty and ugliness, right and wrong, truth and untruth. And these kinds of questions are necessary for what I think is the most fundamental inquiry, which is how should we live? And so the Bucklerian account that I'm developing would say that to practice philosophy requires, first of all, that we are able to read the world, read our landscapes, read our experience as having all these different kinds of meaning, as having assertive meaning, exhibitive meaning, and active meaning relative to our values. And also that we are able to experience all these varieties of wonder, some of them that signify tragedy and some that signify hope regarding our values. And that in our inquiry, we inquire in such a way that enables us to make assertive, exhibitive, and active judgments that ward off tragedy and fulfill hope. And this next slide is kind of a nod to my deconstructionist friends who worry that pragmatists' emphasis on optimism and amelioration ignores the dark side of inquiry, which is that whenever we create kinds of judgments, when we create new meaning, we're always also closing off other kinds of meaning. So we need to be aware constantly of the hegemony and the potential imperialism, the potential colonialism of the judgments that we make, especially if we are in a situation of power and privilege. We may think that we're just creating new meaning, but at the same time, we're closing off other kinds of meaning. And that's, again, as Jennifer said, that's why we need to do this in community. All right, and then finally, I'm just going to talk briefly about teaching philosophy. So first, a little bit of genealogy. Justice Buckler was Matthew Lipman's mentor at Columbia University, and the categories that Matthew Lipman and Anna Margaret Sharp talked about in terms of good thinking, some people are familiar with this. They talked about critical thinking, creative thinking, and caring thinking, and those derive pretty directly from Buckler's categories of assertive, exhibitive, and active judgment. And second, in Philosophy for Children, Matthew Lipman once said, we do not teach discrete skills and then give children a way to practice them and apply them in their lives. That's not what we do. In fact, we work in the opposite direction. We provide experiences of genuine wonder in the context of the children's home, their school, their friendships, their neighborhood, and the wider world that they consume through media. And the wonder that they experience, he said, extracts judgments from them in dialogue and in active creative projects. So that's really important to me. Again, I'm going to go back and do that again. We don't teach discrete skills and then provide opportunities for children to practice them and ourselves to practice them and apply them. Instead, we create situations that provoke wonder in ourselves and in our students and our families, given in our immediate embedded situations, in the landscapes where we live. And that wonder extracts judgments from us. We find ourselves making judgments. And then a teacher might come along and talk about the different kinds of judgments that we're making, and we might work on those, and we might become meta-aware of them. And then we find ways to test our judgments and experience. And I'm just going to give you one concrete example that happened with a teacher we were working with in Montclair. She was a doctoral student in philosophy for children. And she was working with, I think it was a combined fourth and fifth grade group of students, and they were using Matthew Lipman's philosophical novel, Q and Gus, which was intended as a kind of philosophy of nature program. And in reading this novel and discussing having philosophical inquiries about nature, the children started to ask questions about their school environment. And they realized that the school their school was surrounded by really artificial landscaping. Most of it was lawn, was grass that had been planted there, like for soccer fields and for other things, but it was really not being used. And so the children decided they wanted to. They did some research into native plants and native species and native animals, and they raised money. And they transformed their school environment into a nature reserve. with all native plant species that would attract native insects and native animals. They got the community involved in fundraising, and they, of course, brought experts in to help them understand what kind of native plants would thrive in their area. And they became involved with the Jane Goodall Institute Roots and Shoots program, and they received a big award, and Jane Goodall came and visited the school. And it was a really amazing program. So the last thing I want to share with you is the latest project from the Institute for the Advancement of Philosophy for Children. We have just rolled out a new curriculum resource called Thinking in Stories About Nature. And there's a little QR code here, and I can also send people the link. And what we've done is we looked at children's literature, picture books and chapter books, and a few documentary films that go philosophical about nature in different ways. And we went looking at all the different kinds of materials that were out there. We came up with 10 different categories in philosophy of nature that are addressed by these different picture books. For example, spirituality and nature, nature and beauty and ugliness, of course, environmental justice, child activism in nature, those kinds of categories. And for each of those categories, we have some children's books that talk about them. And we have written reviews of these books that kind of explain how they go philosophical and how they might be used by parents and teachers and librarians. So I'm really excited about that. And this is an ongoing project. We continue to find more books and add to them and shift our categories around. So if anybody wants to join us in this project, please do. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maughn, and congratulations for your experience, your work. It's very, we are very enthusiastic with this idea. So thank you so much again. So last but not least, Nathalie Frogneux, are you there? Hi, Nathalie.
Hi.
Nathalie é professora, ela é doutora em filosofia e história da religião, e também em antropologia da religião no Instituto Católico de Paris e Paris 4, Sorbonne, França. Ela é professora da Universidade Católica de Louvain, mora em Louvain-la-Neuve, na Bélgica. Foi professora visitante em Roma, da Universidade de Roma, La Sapienza, em 2022. Ela escreveu o seu livro, né, talvez que é conhecido muitos de nós aqui, Jonas ou la vie dans le monde, que é de 2001. E além de vários artigos, trabalhos sobre Jonas e temas, vamos dizer assim, paralelos à filosofia do Jonas, ela também traduziu e fez a introdução do livro da introdução do livro do Jonas, La Gnose e o Espírito da Antiguidade Tardia, né? A História e Metodologia da Pesquisa, que foi publicado pela Mimesis em 2017. E a Nathalie, sobretudo, é nossa amiga. Muitos de nós que trabalhamos com Jonas devemos muito a ela pelo seu trabalho, pelo seu incansável esforço também de interpretar e fazer a gente entender melhor a obra do Jonas. Como o Roberto também falou no início, a Nathalie e ele e a gente aqui estamos trabalhando um livro agora sobre Jonas, que está quase pronto. Então, a gente está muito feliz. We are very happy, Nathalie, to be here with you again and to listen your ideas. So thank you so much. I don't know if you will speak in English or in French.
Yes, I will try to.
Okay.
So I have to apologize for my English because I will speak after so good speakers in English. But
they are native.
Yes, they are native. So I will try to, and I accept the challenge of presenting my hypothesis. So that's what I wanted to say. I would like to thank Gelson and Roberto for the organization of this Congress, and apologize to be here in Belgium and not with you in Curitiba. But that's life, and
That's a pity.
yes, of course. So I would like to talk about a philosophical project that we have here in Louvain. And yes, I will share my presentation. It will be easier, I think. Do you see my screen?
Not yet.
No.
Nathalie, if you wish, I can share it from here for you, and you tell me.
Yes, thank you, Roberto.
Let me just share.
So we are friends, and Roberto knows me very, very well. So thank you, Roberto. So it's the presentation of a project of on education for the ecological crisis that we will develop here in Belgium with a sociologist and a psychologist. And I will present the first part. So the way we are trying to make our hypothesis. So I am on the second slide. Roberto. The problem is what kind of crisis have we to face? Is it a climate change crisis, a biodiversity crisis, a health crisis, or multiple crises? Is it the problem of a transition? I think that the way that we are facing the problem will develop some kinds of education, and they are very different, and they can develop very different values. So I'm on the slide after this one. Very significant differences in the educational options lie behind very different ways of understanding the crisis. We must therefore begin by defining how we understand the crisis, and for this, a general map is very helpful. So I will use a very interesting map that was developed by a researcher in France, and it's a way to understand better what is the complexity of the comprehension of how can I say climate change problem. So it's a work in progress. I am on the slide after. It's a work in progress. It's the problem of understand what is climate change education is, ECC. What is ECC? Our observation is that schools and international program designed as climate change education is biased, that is green technology and sustainability development who lies under this kind of project. So taking the map of ecological thoughts, Roberto, I am in the further slide. By the map of ecological thoughts by Thomas Wagner, who is called Bon Pote, good buddy, and it's a free map that is on the website. I take the link for you. I took the link for you. So it's on the further slide, Roberto. Yes, it's yes, Bon Pote, la carte des pensées écologiques. So it's very interesting because it's recent, and it's a map of the most important ecological thought. It's to be completed and to be questioned, and that's what I will do here. But it's very interesting because of the breadth of thoughts covered by the research. So it can clarify the roots of ecological thoughts, and not just theoretically, but also with the practices, the beliefs, benchmarks in political action. And the interest of this is the possibility to clarify what we are meaning when we are speaking about climate change crisis. Of course, there are bias on this map. Roberto, I am the next one. Thank you. Because it's written in French. It's the French literature. It's overrepresented. It's a European perspective, I think, and the author's position is quite visible. So I will try to interpret it for a first glance, and speak about the main families that are interesting for me. So I'm on the next one. Roberto, I don't know, it will be impossible to show also the map, I can imagine. Or are you so expert in technology to show both? Oh.
I'll check it out. You can continue and I'll try to fix the problem.
The 8 main families of ecological approaches are 1, anti-industrial, 2nd, libertarian, 3rd, decolonial, 4, eco-feminist, 5, environmental ethics, 6, eco-socialism, 7, techno-solutionist, and 8, survival ecologies. So I will briefly summarize the position, and it's obvious that there are links and there are people who are between two currents, but I think that it's clarifying for our objective. So anti-industrial ecologies are a critical approach. It's a critical approach of the technological and industrial system with its own logic, which must be considered holistically. Roberto, I am on the... Yes, thank you very much. They are critical about thermo-industrial and cybernetic and digital society, critical about productivism and hyper-mechanization. So they are critical against gigantism of the productive apparatus and the state of the devastation they cause to ecosystem and human beings. So they reject the Enlightenment ideology of progress. Key authors for this movement are Hans Jonas, Karl Jaspers, Ivan Illich, Jacques Ellul, and Günther Anders, but also Alexander Grothendieck and Frankfurt School, like Herbert Marcuse, for instance. They are related currents. So the degrowth current, He's shared here in France by Serge Latouche and Philippe Bioux, but also anti-nuclear movements who are direct action groups, but also environmental groups like Friend of the Earth and Greenpeace. There are also anti-digital movements and very recent anti-digital movements. And a colleague of mine, Marc Ugnadi, who is very critical in confront of intelligence and artificial intelligence. The second movement is libertarian ecologies. So the ideal of emancipation, autonomy, and self-governance is the main point of this movement. They are critical about the domination of men over men, of men over women, and of men over nature. This movement promotes establishment of eco-communities and self-managed communities, democratic institutions as the local level who is decisive for the living, for the humans, for living beings. So they are developing a participatory and a direct democracy, federative principles against the centralization dynamics of the state. The vision of society revolves around the field, the factory, and the workshop, and the radical democracy, sometimes expressed through the use of a random selection. Key authors for this movement are Murray Bookchin, Prokopkin, Cornelis Castoriadis, André Gors, Joel Zask, Rob Hopkins, and Totno's Eco Village, and Schumacher with Schumacher College. So I will go further. Ecofeminism is the third movement. Roberto, we can go further. Thank you. Ecofeminism is a family and not a philosophical movement, but we can see this family like a movement of criticism for the domination of nature and women, because both are inseparable. So it's a nebulous concept with blurred boundaries. Ecofeminism has been pluralistic from the outset, highlighting the diversity and geographical origins and ideological influences that make up this movement: socialism, spiritualism, queer theory, Marxism, decolonial thought. So it's not apart from the other, but the main point of this movement is the role of women that has been subordinated to purple reproductive function, and nature has been associated with the image of these dominated women whom capitalism must subjugate, exploit, and even violate. Key authors for this movement are Françoise Daubonne, Caroline Merchant, Val Plumwood, Vandana Shiva, Starhawk, Emily Ash, Silvia Federici, and maybe also Baptiste Morisot. Environmental ethics are insisting on the relationship between human and nature. This movement I summarize very strongly, but there are three trends in this movement. Natural spaces have intrinsic value in themselves and not conferred by humans. Nature cannot be judged solely on its usefulness to humans. Against modern anthropocentrism, humans are one species within the bioethic community, so they are anti-speciesist and against human exceptionalism. I'm so sorry for my English. Key authors are Arnes, Aldo Leopold, Imanishi Kinji, and Wangari Maathai. For the eco-socialism, the thesis is that social oppression and the destruction of nature have the same cause. It's that is to say, capitalism. And this movement is an extension of Marxism and socialism, but adds consideration of ecosystems and opposes its productivism and technophile options. So this movement calls for the socialization of the means and production of democratic self-government, ranging from strong state interventionism to self-management perspective. As the key authors, we have André Gorce, Michael Louis, and Paul Magnet, for instance, who is a Belgian, so a Belgian politiker. Let's go to decolonial ecologies. So the ecolonial movement critique the Western-centric ecology, who is quite liberal, and they are critique against the primary responsive of the catastrophe, that is to say, the West. They are critique against the nationalist universalism, who is abstract and racist, and they are critique in confront of the deadly vision of nature of Western world. So they are critique also against the extractivism, colonial plantation, and its colonialism producing impoverished natures, cheapization. So this movement is very important and very huge, and I just want to mention key authors like John Martinez-Allier, Malcolm Ferdinand, Donna Haraway, Anat Singh, and Jason Moore. Related to this current, and so in link with the eco-socialism, we have the Marxism and the ecofeminism of subsistence. 7, the techno-solutionist ecologies or green capitalism. Transition as a sustainable development. So it's the movement that is shared by the European Green Deal. European Green Deal is based on this ideology. So yes, it's all of this is very, very summarized, but it's to explain a bit the position. So the objective of this movement is to integrate ecological parameters into the existing economic and social order. It's to moderate and correct the excesses or oversights of capitalism by integrating the environmental dimension into production and commercial exchanges, taxes, compensation, green technology, digitalization, and so on. Key authors of this movement are Jean-Marc Jancovici and Christiana Figueres Ferrer, David Keith. So there are also so many CEO of enterprises. And the last one is survivor ecologies. Our author, so Thomas Wagner, called them ecofascism, but I prefer to call them survival ecologies. They are emerged quietly since 1980, 1980s, and in Europe, they advocate eco-differentialism, or the idea of humanity divided into different races or civilizations that must remain separate because they are adapted to their immediately environment. Everyone in their own home becomes everyone in their own ecosystem. In the United States, neo-Malthusianism and xenophobia are coupled with an apology for large, unspoiled space, wilderness soiled by immigration. They are driven by fear for themselves, individuals, families, clans, or country. For this movement, we have maybe more political movement that really key authors, but I will mention Alain de Benoist and Gareth Hardin. So when we are trying to understand what are the learning outcomes for this movement, it's quite different. And the skills developed are quite different. I would like to mention for the first one, anti-industrial ecologies, the critical thinking with very, very important, the contest ability, the capacity to escape dependence on the system, regaining autonomy, self-governance, and vernacular. The ideal of society in this movement is self-sufficiency, development of craft, recovering and recycling, return to personal and community contact, and less energy-consuming techniques, low-tech, less dependence on digitalization. So, I'm in the next one. Thank you, Roberto. The anti-industrial ecology are I think in the idea of homeschooling, this schooling society, like Cuernavaca with Ivan Illich, and research community. We can discuss, of course, of this. The second one, I will take together ecofeminism and decolonial ecology because it's quite the same in educational option, I think. They are focused on life of children, biodiversity, animals, plants. They are developing community practices, intercultural, cross-cultural contribution, equality, respect are the values for the education in this movement. Return to traditional knowledge and skills, real struggles, social struggles, and so active movement for the children also. They are challenging systems of domination, challenging dualism, and they are learning by doing with immersion in nature. So we can have the purpose of a school of Bielefeld in Germany with Maria Mies, small farming communities, or permaculture. The third one is techno-solutionist ecologies. They want to reform a current school system, to give more mathematics and science and more technological knowledge to children, to develop a new science and technological knowledge, to manage the energy decline, and to digitalize the society. The fourth movement, survival ecologies, are developing survival schools, so preparing for the worst. So, they are linked to the collapsed thinking, I think. So they are preparing the children for the worst. So disengagement from society. They are trying to develop the physical, the psychology, and the social ability of children to stay by themselves. So it is an education in self-confidence, overcoming fear, and to be brave to face danger. So it's an individual education. Law of the strongest is the motto for them, being able to survive on one's own without depending on anyone, and they are developing a negative freedom. In the environmental ethics, they are developing a very different kind of a way to think the crisis. They are developing the creative thinking. They are educating in feelings and emotion, empathy, trust, listening to the other. So a very communitarian education. Open up new imaginations, new narratives to think differently about our relationship with nature, animals, and living beings. They are developing dialogue and think tanks. They study history and tradition to learn what mistakes had been made, capitalism, colonialism, modern mechanism, and so on, and to consider alternatives. And the last one, eco-socialism and libertarian ecology. I take both in one slide because I think they have quite the same option of education. They are developing ability to negotiate and find common solution, rethinking and practicing democracy, and finding the scale at which it is practiced. Ability to consider social and global issues as well as environmental issues, rethinking the economy, social institution, and the environment as interdependent. This requires interdisciplinary training in social sciences and natural sciences. So they are studying the Earth system, and so they are not against a university, for instance, like other currents. I think that we can talk about it. I think that we can take philosophy for children in this movement. So my conclusion is that some movements are radically opposed to the school system and academic expertise. Others believe that reform within this system is needed. Some are based on tradition. Others reject the history of modernity. Some think on a local scale. Others on an international scale. Some are individualistic and others are communitarian. These different interpretation of the ecological crisis lead to different ways of thinking about education. We have created types, but it is clear that they are not completely separate. And if we are looking at the map, maybe during the discussion, Roberto will show us the map. It's quite obvious that it's very, very complicated to understand all these movements and these practices, and it can be interpreted, but it will be wonderful if we can share this map and complete it with our point of view, with the Brazilian point of view, with other schools that I ignore, but I would like to know. Thank you very much for your patience with my English. Thank you.
Was great, Nathalie. Thank you so much. It was very comprehensible, so don't worry. Thank you, Roberto, again, because your help was important now. So, friends, we have some time now to discuss. And I would like to ask if Roberto and Gregory, they have some question. And we could as well put questions each one here if you want. So we are free to open the discussion. I don't know. No, we don't have. Roberto, do you have some question or some?
So I was looking at the chat, and there are no questions yet. Here I'm sharing la carte de pensée écologique. Nathalie, is it this one that you were mentioning?
It's not there yet, Roberto.
So let me see. Let me just double check again.
If you want, I can share my screen and take it here and share my screen.
Okay, yes, could be.
Perhaps be better.
Yes.
A moment.
Yeah.
Berto, I will send you my. Oh, I can send it in the chat. You see the chat.
So now I'm trying to share the screen, and so la carte de pensée écologique. Are you seeing it?
No, Roberto. It's just.
Oh,
I can share the.
Do you see the
share
link?
my.
Yes. That's it.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Are you seeing?
Yes.
Okay. Could you explain, Nathalie, what is?
So it's the interest is that you have not only the main authors, but also the books. You have also here in gray, you have the history of the roots of the thought. The legend is here. You have the schools, the actions, the authors, and you have the link. So influences, dependencies, and so on. So it's not so simple as I said, but it's quite clear to understand which are the position of the authors and the movements. So you have Latour, you have Alplumwood, Reclaim, and so on.
Very nice.
I think it's useful and it's very interesting to complete and to use with our students.
Very nice.
But it's also useful to understand what kind of education we are sharing with our students or with our children. So I didn't try to I even try to speak about pragmatism, because I think that pragmatism is very huge and is a transversal way of teaching. And I don't have the problem of happiness here on the map, so you can explain where it is for you. I'm sorry, it's in French. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Nathalie. So I would like to put some question to Jennifer. And about because now in Brazil, Jennifer, we are discussing this problem of regulation of the big techs, and you spoke about, for instance, the effect of the screens with the children and these kind of things. And I would like to know how is the situation about this problem or this question, these issues in Australia. If you have some law or official, how can I say, tools to control the effect of the big techs and, for instance, the algorithms and the influence of these, for instance, these big techs on the children, on the young people. So just to start.
Yeah, I should have mentioned since when I wrote that paper that presentation is based on last year, and since then Australia has become the first nation in the world to bring in they passed a bill this year to ban children having social media accounts for Facebook. I think YouTube's been added to it now, TikTok, Instagram. And it will be on the technology companies. They have to work out a way to ensure that children under the age of 16 are not signing up accounts on their technologies, so on their platforms. And if they do not do that, they will be fined, and increasing fines the more they fail to do it. So the government doesn't have to come up with a way of blocking it. The technology companies have to come up with a way of regulating this and ensuring children aren't using those technologies. And the reason for that was because of all this sort of research coming out from psychologists and mental health experts and doctors about concerns about the impact of technology. But there are still people who question it, who think the evidence is not clear about whether that's a cause or not. But I think the dominant view is that it is one. And it comes into effect. I think it's supposed to come into effect in January. I don't know, Gil might know. So the law is being passed through Parliament, but they're still trying to implement it. I think it's by January they have to. They weren't happy about it. Zuckerberg and all these people. So I think they just added YouTube as well. So children, I think, can still view things like YouTube, but they can't have a YouTube account themselves.
Gelson, you're mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. I lost my microphone. So we have a question here about the map. Does the map help you to clarify your view of philosophy and your educational engagement with environmental issues? This kind of map that Nathalie showed us. Do you think this is a question for each for all of you? So if the map clarify your view of philosophy and your educational engagement with environmental issues, what do you think about? Perhaps Gilbert or Maughn, what do you think?
I have a go at that question. I think I'd have to study the map a lot more because I obviously didn't. But I do like those sorts of diagrams that create connections between the different kinds of ways in which we approach certain topics. And in this case, how we might see how different approaches look at different kinds of ways in which we tackle environment. And so I think it's useful in that sense. As I said, I need to study it further. But I guess one of my questions that would be arise is the obvious one, where pragmatism and something like that fits into those things, because it seems to me that the categories describe particular ways in which certain groups like ecofeminists and eco-fascists and other ways approach an issue, Whereas I guess the pragmatist thing is looking more at the process of how inquiry fits into those things. So in that sense, being a pragmatist myself, it does make it useful for being able to look at, if you're looking at children's discussions, where children might be coming from in certain ways of, the ways they're thinking. And it allows you to look in greater depth at what does it mean to be an ecofeminist in that side. But also, I think it draws attention to the overlaps, because like all of those things, you can't avoid the overlaps. But that's, I think, the important thing, is the messy part of the ambiguity where everything fits in. But, so I like the idea of being able to look at that at a glance, you might say. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Can I build on that?
Of course,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, I really like what you said, Gil. And I think for me, like a pragmatist looking at the map would say, the question is not which of those theories gets it right, but what possibilities does each theory open up for us, help us to see different things, and what do they close off? Like what, right? This framework allows us to see these kinds of things, but it also makes other kinds of things obscure. So, to put it crudely, like what's the cash value of each one? Like what work can we do with each one of them? And I think it would be really interesting to translate each of those into like a children's book, like a children's story or a children's, right? So that children could have access to it. And so that children could, with us, children can like look through the lens of eco-socialism. And what new things do I notice when I'm looking through that lens about my own life, about, the child's life, the child's environment? I think that would be great as a springboard for inquiry.
Great. So Claire, who is with us, Claire Cassidy, make a question. I wonder how we promote happiness in children without making them immune to the issues we all face, and how we help them to engage with the issues while promoting happiness. Might philosophy with children help with this? I believe it's to Jennifer.
Yes. So I've got a thing saying my internet's unstable. We have bad weather here. So yes, because it's not we're talking about not a hedonic sense of happiness, not happiness as pleasure, more like meaning, a sense of meaning and purpose. Sometimes that actually involves, well, being unhappy, and often it starts with being unhappy or anxious. Like inquiry starts with problems, and sometimes the problem is one that's just curious, and it could be a joyful one, but often it causes anxiety. And so in the little example I gave, the students felt guilty and they felt anxious and worried about finding out that the clothing they were wearing was really bad for the environment, and that they had been contributing to this problem by being materialistic and wasteful. So it started with quite negative feelings. But the sort of inquiry and the communal inquiry skills that Philosophy for Children fosters provide a sort of confidence and practical skill set for dealing with this, for tackling problems and overcoming them. So in a way that can foster, not necessarily, it might not foster happiness in the sense that, the climate change situation is a serious one. These little things that individuals do, that students do, are not going to solve the problem. You need big changes from government to address it. And at this point, that's not going to stop the significant harms anyway, because it's gone on too far. But it's still giving people a sense of purpose and some confidence and skills and abilities to try and work together to address these things. So it can improve well-being, help mitigate a sense of hopelessness and that sort of thing, but it's not, yeah, it's not going to create like joy or happiness or make people oblivious to the problems, because it's all focused on, yeah, it's focused on creating meaningfulness and well-being through addressing problems, responding to social problems, not a sort of hedonistic notion of, it's not putting your head in the sand and just not being happy by not caring. It might get to a point where that you may as well do that. I don't know. But but at the moment, I think we still keep teaching how to deal with the problems, how to find the problems, look at them, articulate them well, address them, and so on. But not so happy and joyful that you're not paying attention to what's going on around you. The opposite of that, which is, I think, the whole point of philosophy for children.
Claire, add something, Jennifer, or wherever would like to answer. I know you all have a lot to say for yourselves. So it's okay. It's that. I was wondering, perhaps for you, because I'm not a specialist in philosophy for children. All I know is because of Roberto, who is he's teaching a lot of these things to us. But I was wondering after your speech about which kind of children are we speaking about. It means, do you can imagine, for instance, the contribution of the philosophy for children when we are speaking about indigenous children or Black children that are living, for instance, in the countryside, in Brazil countryside. Do you believe that is different? There is something different when we are asking about which kind of children, or in your country, or for instance, if I think in Brazil, there is different realities. For instance, here in Curitiba, we have one kind of children. Perhaps they have more money, they are white, they have a family. But if we are thinking about children that are in the, I don't know, in the countryside, as I said, if they are indigenous, they live in Amazonia, or I don't know, there is something different. Which kind of contribution we could think about these different realities of children? I don't know. It's a provoking question, sorry.
Can I have a go at answering
that?
Are you doing that one, are you? Go on.
No, you go, Gil. I was waiting for someone else.
I think the notion of what you call different types of children, meaning, I guess, you can look at that in terms of socioeconomic communities, you can look at that in terms of geographical locations and so forth. And therefore we have, in terms of ontologically, the kinds of experiences and the kinds of beings people are, and also the epistemic notions surrounding all that. So that's where I think that looking at the notion of being place-based or place-responsive looks at that very issue, because what it's arguing is, when we look at children, we've got to look at the context of where they're coming from. So, for example, if I look at the context here, and not just in Australia, because, the children where in the area where Jen is different to the children here in Ipswich. So living in Ipswich, I'm quite aware, after living here for 20 years, of the context I'm in, the community, the children, the schools, the university I used to teach at, and including the colonial history and everything that's revolved around. So we look at the children and say, well, okay, they all have different experiences, because, I guess the richer kids from the older families who've been here for generations, the white kids, have a certain experience. All the people that are moving here, over the last 20 years have different experiences, and as well as the Indigenous groups. So I think often when we're in philosophy for children, we talk about, I guess, children in general, and there's always something in common that children have, but I think it's important to recognise with people like Darren Chetty and everyone that's written about this, is to look also at when we look at philosophy for children, at the biases of the kind of ways in which philosophy is developed. So I think there's a lot of people now addressing that issue as to what kind of children are we looking at. And I think that's become a very important question. It certainly has with the research that I've been doing with Simone and Mary, as well as with Jen in climate change, is looking at how it differently affects us. Because living in poor areas, if you're a black kid in a poor area, you're going to be affected differently by climate change than if you're living in an area near Princeton, for example, because there's going to be different power relations. There's different ways in which we can deal with those things. And I think that's a very important thing, is to take into account those children's experiences, but equally as important to have those children express that, but also accept that other children have different experiences. And as Maughn was pointing out, we might all come to conclusions. Here's something with Ipswich, but if the group of children here were talking, online with some of Maughn's children over in New Jersey, we'd have to have another meta conversation that would, you do that. How come you got this and we don't have that? So children start to realize the differences within their experiences, but they have something in common. The common is they might all be struggling with solastalgia when they're thinking of their own anxieties in terms of climate change. Yeah, so I think it's a good question, and I think we should be addressing it more in philosophy for children, but I think in the last at least 5 years, but a decade, it's becoming more and more common to address that issue. And in fact, there is going to be a special issue out next week with that's in the childhood and philosophy, that's tackling with that issue about racism and different things in philosophy for children.
Jennifer, would you to add something?
Oh, no, only that philosophy for children for a very long time, Maughn can talk about this too, has been done all over the world with all sorts, with different children in all different places. I would expect it to look, it's not my area of expertise, I would expect it to look different wherever it's done. And once you take it into different communities, that they would reflect on it. And that's a whole, philosophy for children has that element of it anyway, that you can always reflect on and adapt and critique the procedures of inquiry themselves. You may find that they're problematic, or that they're culturally specific and don't apply in particular places. But even early on in Australia, philosophy for children was done with Indigenous communities in the Northern Territory. Somebody from, I've forgotten his name, Gilbert, from University, Deakin in Melbourne, he went up and ran a whole program up in the Northern Territory. What was his name? Linda?
Clive Linda and
yeah.
Robert Laird. Yeah, Robert Laird, yes.
Yeah, and Robert Laird, that's right. Yeah, I think. And certainly was done all popular in Mexico as well, right, Maughn? Yep. So, but I would expect it, to be changed and transformed and adapted wherever it was taken up and used.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Jennifer. I think that one of the ways, one of the things that's been happening in philosophy for children globally, I think, in the last maybe 20 years, is what I would call like a localization, where people are just in the ways that we've been talking about, are adapting things and coming up with new ways of philosophizing with children, inviting children into a local philosophical practice. Local, both in the sense that it draws on their local philosophical heritage, whatever that is. It might not be the Western heritage that Lippmann and Sharp put into their novels. But also, the local concerns, the local political climate, the local ecological climate. And I think that, one of the things I think philosophy for children has done well is not to try to impose or pre-guess what the concerns or the questions children will raise that they want to philosophize about. So even though we bring materials to them sometimes, like we write novels or we find children's stories, local children's stories, or other kinds of stimulus to help them start thinking about their own philosophical questions, they're the ones who come up with the philosophical questions. And I really like something Jennifer said earlier about paying attention. I think that I like to see, I'm trying to bring more contemplative educational exercises into the philosophy that help children kind of spend less time in their head and more time in their body, like paying attention to like these, when I talked about the different kinds of wonder, like the guilt or the confusion or the sadness or the anxiety or the hope or the fun or the sense of possibility, or right, that those things are in the body. And that if I learn how to stop being distracted by those certainty machines that Gil talked about, if I can stop being distracted by my machines and by the kind of wacky discursive thinking that those machines involve me in, and bring my attention back into my body. And maybe if I do feel anxious or sad or guilty, I can be curious about that, right? It's like, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me, but what's that about? This knot I have in my stomach, like, where did that come from? What's that about? I'm curious about that, and inquire. And that the philosophical questions that come out of that kind of experience will be very local to children, wherever they are.
Yeah, and one of the reasons, to add to that, one of the reasons nature, just being in nature, might be so associated with help with well-being and alleviate things like anxiety is well, some people question the research on this, but there is lots of research supporting it. Just being in nature can help alleviate some of the symptoms of anxiety. Is that people can't help but pay attention to it. There's something about us because it's where we come from and how we survive in the world, that we just can't help but pay attention to the things around us, and distracts us from just going over these repetitive thoughts that characterize anxiety and negative thinking. You're drawn out of yourself into the world. You can't help but pay attention to these things. And action and social relationships do the same thing. So exercise, and it has the same thing. Like, there's this guy, this podcast, 10% Happier podcast, is quite he interviews all these experts about happiness, and he always uses this expression: action absorbs anxiety. Once you're out doing stuff, it gets you out of your head. When you're using your body, you're using up that.
I just wanted to add to both of that. I think the notion of, which I guess I always take for granted in anything I do with place responsive education, is that place responsiveness and place consciousness, it deals exactly what Maughn and Jen are talking about, is that when we're talking about place responsive, it's not just about what's in our heads. It's about how does place affect us, but at the same time, how does what we do affect place? So, on the same time, you've got anxieties. Well, how are your anxieties affecting your habitat? So your habits affect the habitat, but at the same time, how does the habitat affect us? So we can get into this loop. And what I think with place responsivity is that if you've got someone that can guide that kind of thing, it can look at, especially a teacher who's been in the locality for years, right, can look at what those things might be. So it's drawing their attention to their anxieties as not just being a psychological problem or a state they're in, that there is a genuine connection between their anxieties, but also are there other ways to deal with that? And that's where I think place consciousness and place responsivity become a very important part. And I think it's an overlooked part in Dewey as well. But that's another story about how Dewey can be not considered so much an environmentalist as such as we know it today, but that his connection between habit and habitat's an important thing that a lot of people haven't picked up on. They tend to treat it like a bit of a kind of a utilitarianism rather than treating it as engagement, but that the human is also organic, and therefore it's part of an organic relationship between culture, nature, and itself. And that kind of does make his personhood relational. And therefore, you start looking at emotions connecting to the ontology of place. And I think that makes a really good understanding of things. But also, if you move into other communities, to say, well, the first thing I've got to do, as they say with Australian Aboriginal people, is I got to listen. I got to listen to those that have welcomed me into their country before I say anything, because they know more than I do, and I have to learn from them. And I think that's an important part that we've got to start thinking about in terms of pedagogy.
Perfect. Nathalie, there is some linked questions with this discussion, with your work there, your project. Someone from Açores asked if what we are thinking about the contribution of children for these families of feminisms and this so on. It means could you imagine how the children could be which is the contribution of this of the children to this map? How do they position themselves in relation to their relationship with the nature, for instance, or the environmental issues? What kind of perspective they could reflect in themselves? It means which is the contribution of the children for this map?
So I think that we can use it as a pedagogical tool. So we can use it like a static map, and to listen to children, and after that to try to explain which are the movements where the conception of the children here is. So, for instance, to explain that we are at the beginning of the conception of what is a crisis, if there is a crisis, and so on. And after that, we can use this tool as an active map, so children could use it to add something, add practices that they have, and it's not on the map, to explain which are the link for them. I think that with little children, we have to use a very simple map. We don't have to use this one with authors and so on. It could be a different map, and we are trying to conceive a very simple map who is used as a static map and as an interactive map. So we will try to do it in this project of climate change education. But we are at the beginning, so I don't. It's a project until now, and we will. Our project actually is for children between not children, but young people of teenagers, and we will see if we have money to try also this project with children between 6 and 12 years.
Perfect. Good luck. It's very,
thank you.
very, very interesting. So we have not so much time, but I would like to ask you to add some, if you want to add some final words to the people, if you want to add something. So you are free to open your microphone and to say goodbye. Perhaps we could start with Gilbert, and then Jennifer, Maughn, and Nathalie.
I don't think I have much more to add, but I would like to say thank you to everyone in the panel, because I was, particularly interested in a lot of the connections we've had. When I first got here, I was wondering how Nathalie might connect, but now I see that there's some really good connections. And I like the idea of what you call simplifying the map, to be able to use that as narratives for children to engage with, which I think works in perfect with Maughn's idea of how we should have children's books that, in a sense, can map this, because I don't think there's a lot out there that does that, and I think that's sort of an important thing to do. But yes, but I'd like to thank everybody, and it's good to see everybody here again.
Thank you. Jennifer?
No, I just wanted to say, with Nathalie, I was heavily influenced by ecofeminism. It was very big in Australian feminist philosophy. And my honours supervisor was Freya Matthews. She's also leading ecofeminists like Val Plumwood, and they knew each other well. And I used Val's work a lot. So you could add Freya Matthews to the ecofeminists as well. She's a wonderful ecofeminist philosopher. But I think I've used it. I integrated it with pragmatism. So I think they have a lot in common, especially the rejection of dualisms, which Val Plumwood gave one of the best, I think, accounts of the problem of dualisms and how to reject them. Just wanted to add that point in there. So yeah, pragmatism fits everywhere, but I've integrated it for a long time with ecofeminist thinkers. And I just wanted to say, yeah, thank you to Roberto and Gelson as well, and the whole panel.
Thank you, Jennifer. Maughn?
Yeah, I just want to echo the connections. It's been great. I really love the way that our different perspectives have sort of spoken to each other and connected. We have like a map of theoretical frameworks, and the idea of wonder, the idea of place responsiveness, the idea of pragmatist inquiry, and children, the placement of children, education. I think it's felt very tightly connected, and it's given me a lot to think about. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Maughn. Nathalie?
Thank you. I wanted to thank you, Gelson, Roberto, and all the panel, but I wanted to ask Roberto if he can help me to complete this map with the connection of all the colleagues in the world. So, Roberto, I have work for you. Thank you.
Very happy to hear this. But since it's a collective work, I think it will be a work which we will carry out with pleasure. But I think it's very interesting because we are already building a sort of a network of connections. So I'm already putting your faces on the map, I think, or we could draw a map with our faces on it. So it could be very interesting to map our thinking and to give it a visual shape. So it's interesting. There are very many thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, friends, and good luck with your work, and congratulations. Are very astonished, and we have a lot to do together. So thank you so much, Roberto. So I think we can end this session, and we have another 10 and 30, I think. So
yes,
thank
we
you
just
so
have
much.
15 minutes for a cup of coffee.
Yes. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gelson. Thanks, Roberto. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.